With buy-to-let competition at an all-time high and mortgage rates on the rise, property investors and their portfolios are feeling the pinch. With this in mind, it is vital that investors make the most of every single penny they put into property. So to make sure that you maximise the amount of cash flow you get from your buy-to-let investment, I have created this video. And in it, I'm going to run through 5 of the most important things you can do, and more importantly, shouldn't do, to make sure you get the most cash flow from your property. But before I jump into this video, if you want to make sure your property deal makes sense and cash flows, head down to the link in the description for my monthly investor newsletter. Anyone that subscribes will get my free buy-to-let property investing cash flow calculator spreadsheet. It's a template and you input the numbers for your deal that you're analysing and it will spit out the ROI and various other things. It's completely free to use and it's completely free for you to download, and it's something that I use personally when I'm analysing deals. So head down to the link in the description, become a subscriber of my newsletter and grab your free property ROI calculator. Okay, now let's get into the video. Oh, and be sure to stick around to the end of the video where I will give you 2 more bonus tips. Now, please bear in mind that I am talking about your standard 2 to 3 bed terraced or semi-detached property in this video. I'm not talking about a multi-million pound luxury London home. Although some of the tips in this video might still be relevant in that situation too, but that's not specifically what we're talking about in this video. So my first tip in maximising your property's cash flow is don't spend money on expensive accessories, fixtures and fittings. Now I'm talking specifically about things like light fixtures and fittings, taps, door handles and doors themselves, whether that's hollow core or solid core. None of these things will actually increase your monthly cash flow that you get from the property. Because from a tenant's perspective, whether the tap costs £100 or £50 doesn't actually make any real difference to them. They care about whether it works as it should when they need it. Now, that's not to say that it shouldn't look good, but 99% of the time you can buy an expensive tap for half the price, and the only difference in reality is the cost to your bank. And on this point, it's important to remember that you are not going to be living in the property, so it doesn't need to be to the standard that you would like your home to be in if you were living in it. It needs to be a good, quality, livable standard. Another example of this is the type of doors that you put into a property if it needs them. If the property doesn't need new doors but you would like new doors if you were living there, then don't put new doors in. In most situations, you just need to give doors a good sand, repaint and maybe replace the door hardware such as the handles and maybe the lock-in bit if the ones that are on there currently either don't work as they should or are looking a bit old and tired. A tenant will not care or be willing to pay more every month for solid core doors, but your cash flow will take a hit. Moving on to tip number 2, don't replace the kitchen. Now, hear me out on this one because I know it's probably going to cause a little bit of uproar. Now, the average cost of a new kitchen is somewhere in the region of around £7,000. That's a lot of money, but will it actually increase the cash flow of your property? This one is a little bit tricky to give a yes or no answer because it is both yes and no. Now, my preference with the kitchen is always to revamp if I can and replace if I have to. When it comes to decorating the actual kitchen, if there are tiles that are old and outdated, replace them with nice new ones that are white or grey and won't go out of fashion. For the kitchen itself, if the actual shelves are okay but the doors are a bit funky, I would do one of 2 things. 1, sand and paint the doors and fit new door hardware, or 2, if they're a little bit too far gone, or if they're not the type of doors that you can sand and paint, you know, like sometimes these high gloss ones, if they're a bit marked up and if some of the laminate is peeled away, replace the doors only. Don't replace the carcasses if they don't need replacing. Next, I would go in and assess the condition of the worktop. If it is okay and not super old or out of date, I would give it a good clean. If it's wood, sand and re-oil and you're good to go. Worst case, you spend a couple of £100 on a new worktop if it doesn't hold up. In terms of appliances and taps, well, we've already touched on taps, but we'll go over it again quickly. In most situations, unless there is something actually wrong with these things, you can normally get someone in, give them a really good deep clean, and then you're actually good to go. Again, Worst case in this situation is you have to replace an appliance in 6 to 12 months. But it won't be so much of an issue because you would have not spent excess money on the things that you really didn't need to, thanks to the tips just before this one. Now, I'm going to touch on bathrooms here as well because a lot of what I just said actually goes for bathrooms as well. A new bathroom isn't cheap, so if the plumbing is good and the tiling is good, spend some money and get a new bath, sink, radiator and bathroom storage unit for a few £100. It will make the world of difference. When it comes to tiles, a lot of the time they just need a really good clean and maybe a regrout, so as long as the plumbing in the bathroom is good and working, don't fix what isn't broken. Tip number 3. Always replace the boiler if it's old or has been having problems. I have been in this situation on numerous occasions where a boiler has broken on or close to Christmas, and I can tell you now, when it happens, all you think is, why didn't I replace the boiler? Why didn't I replace the boiler? Why didn't I replace the boiler? And it's not because I was being tight, it's because I thought it was fixed. But much like a car, when something starts going wrong with a boiler, more things probably will start going wrong in the near future. A boiler really is one of the most important parts of a home, so it needs to do two things. It needs to work and it needs to be up to standard. If you have even the smallest inclination that it's going to break, just replace it. It's also a good opportunity to move it at this point as well, although it will cost you a little bit more in terms of labour and maybe some parts. If it's in a bedroom, for example, get it moved. It's safer for both the tenant, it's safer for you, and means you'll have a big load of space that you can put something more useful in terms of actual usable for the tenant in that space. Tip number 4, never skimp on the electrics. There are very strict rules and regulations that landlords need to follow when it comes to electrics, and aside from the fact that landlords have to meet these regulations, it's also called just being a good landlord, to make sure that your tenant has safe working electrics. Now, under new regulation which came into effect in June of 2020, so not necessarily brand new, but it's new, all new or renewed private tenancies in England need to have all electrical installations inspected and tested by a qualified person before the start of the tenancy. They must then be tested and inspected a minimum of every 5 years after that point, unless the safety report requires it to be done more often. And if you don't comply, the council has the power to issue a great big whopping fine of up to £30,000. So don't be an idiot and spend the money on a good electrician rather than a fancy lampshade. And finally, tip number 5 for maximising your property's cash flow. Give the front and back garden, if it has one, a bit of TLC. With the emergence of working from home and mental health becoming more and more important and part of the conversation every day, being able to offer tenants a nice outdoor space is important. Now, I'm not talking about going crazy here and spending 20k creating a subtropical paradise in the back garden of a 2-bed semi in Doncaster, but I would say it's worth creating or bringing back to life a small patio area, laying down some fake grass and adding some stone chippings. You really don't have to do too much outside for it to have a big impact. And one of the reasons I say fake grass instead of real is because if you happen to have a tenant who isn't that fond of gardening, they're not going to have to cut the grass, or worse, they just will never cut the grass and leave it to grow 6 foot high, because if and when they leave, it's going to cost you time and money to sort it out anyway. And if you're opting to do it yourself, do it properly. Use a good thick weed membrane, hire a whacker plate, and so on and so on. Do it properly. It will save you in the long run. I recently stripped my garden back to dirt and did something similar to what I just have suggested, and I knowingly have probably over-engineered parts of it, like the fencing and the patio and the fake grass. It's all slightly over-engineered because the plan is to turn this property into a buy-to-let. And the reason that I over-engineered it is because I didn't want to have to worry about getting into a state when I'm no longer living here. And finally, the 2 bonus tips. Bonus tip number 1. If the property has double glazed windows but they look a bit grim, chances are all they need is a really good clean. Don't just go and replace them for the sake of it. If the window is in full working order, i.e. there's no cracks, it's not letting water in, and the locking all works, give them a really good clean and you will save yourself quite literally thousands of pounds rather than getting new ones fitted. And finally, bonus tip number 2, mould. If the property has mold, whatever you do not just paint or wallpaper over it. Now, I know what you might be thinking, Connor, who on earth would do that? Well, I'll tell you who. A property that I recently went and looked at, the owner had done just that. I viewed the property when it was listed originally. It had a pretty bad damp situation and mold problem. I then went to view it again after it had been bought and renovated and then relisted, to only go and find out that the new owner had quite literally wallpapered over the mold. Now, the reason I could tell was because when I go and view a property, if it's got wallpaper or even if it's just painted, I'll always look at the corners. And the reason is that you can normally see it peeling. If it's peeling slightly, I'll just take it a little bit further and have a look what's underneath. And lo and behold, there was damp covering the whole wall and rising. And as I ran my hand over the wallpaper, it felt damp. Now, a finishing note. As landlords, we have a right and responsibility to provide tenants with a clean, habitable, nice property, and we should all want to provide that as landlords. And in return, we want our tenants to pay market rate on time every month. If we don't fulfill our end of the bargain, how can we expect tenants to keep theirs? We can't, it's not fair. We need to be providing good, high quality accommodation for our tenants. And that means not skimping where it's important, but cutting back where it's not so important, as I said in the video, on things like fixtures and fittings. So guys, there you have it. My 5+2 bonus tips on maximising the cash flow that you can get from your buy-to-let property. If you take these tips into account, you could quite literally save yourself thousands of pounds, and in doing so increase your monthly cash flow by hundreds of pounds. Now, as always, nothing I have said in this video has been personal financial advice. I am just some guy on the internet. So with that being said, remember to like and subscribe, and if you want to get access to that free property investment ROI calculator, make sure that you head down to the link in the description, sign up for my monthly newsletter, and you will be sent it straight to your inbox. Now, until next time, stay safe.